Thank you, Navid, Hanif. You may take a seat as we will transition to our fireside chat. I would like to welcome back to the stage Dr. Vera Songwe and Bardouille. Joining them is Sony Kapoor. Sony Kapoor is an interdisciplinary, give them a round of applause. Sony Kapoor is an interdisciplinary professor of climate, geoeconomics and finance at the European University Institute, with a 25-year career spanning finance, policymaking, research, and consulting. He's worked in 80 countries across 5 continents. Recognized for his policy contributions, he's been honored as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum and received fellowships from various prestigious institutions. It's good to have you here, Sony. And to lead this conversation, we're thrilled to have Robin Wigglesworth, the Alphaville editor at the Financial Times. Robin Wigglesworth joined the Financial Times in 2008 and is the author of the book Trillions, a book on the birth and impact of index funds, and has an upcoming book titled The Greatest Show on Earth, which explores the history of the bond market. Robin Wigglesworth, over to you.
Very long introduction. I do love when my books get plugged, even the ones that haven't been written yet. So it is great to be here, because last time I was here, I actually saw the Arctic Monkeys play. Slightly different vibe. I think Arctic Monkeys is a good sort of setting for Norway in late January. I thank everybody for actually coming.
They were the opening act for the Norad Conference.
Exactly, yeah. Next year we'll get them on. But thank everybody for actually traveling to be here in Oslo in late January now. That's pretty brave. Sonny and I live here for our sins. We have a lot of stuff that we want to tackle. I mean, Vera, I'd like to start with you just because you said you were just back from DC. And I feel we have this massive orange elephant in our room here. For other people, it's hard to discuss and talk about. I'm a journalist, I can say whatever I want mostly. But Vera, tell us what the vibe was like and how you see this rather important change in the US political scenery, how that's going to play out on the subjects we're discussing here today.
Well, first of all, thank you, and thanks for the FT. I get all my, what's happening from you as well. No, I think 2 important things. What is happening globally in the world, and I think we sort of briefly mentioned it earlier on, is there is dissatisfaction. And the reason for the dissatisfaction is, as I showed, there's no growth. And so people are not seeing their expectations realized. And so then there is a sort of retreat to more nationalism and to sort of what we know most. And so I think in the development space, when one talks about Washington, one thinks about the international multilateral development system as well, and what is happening there. And the World Bank just had In a Livable Planet added to the mandate in terms of what it needs to do. The IMF, and Kristalina talked about the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. She's now, the IMF is doing climate. And so you have 2 institutions that have come all out on climate. And then within a week, there is a change, I think, in its largest shareholders' position on that. We are hopeful that with private sector coalitions that have been and continue to work with the World Bank and the IMF in particular, that hopefully the policies towards climate will continue to go. And I think we heard from Brazil that there is a need to grow the taxonomy, to move towards compliance in the carbon markets. The good news is that this administration wants to do a CBAM. To do a CBAM, you need to move to compliance carbon markets. So there is some good, I think, that will come out of it. And so we are hopeful that, Elon Musk is there. He is the master of renewable energy cars. And so maybe there will be a time to educate. And then, once you educate, money talks, power talks. That's the title of the session today. In Washington, D.C., money is talking. We hope that money talks to climate.
Yes, well, let's hope so. I think that was definitely the most hopeful version.
Was that for your own sake or for everybody else's sake?
Everybody else's.
Staying on the hopeful theme, because I think we all need some of that these days. Pep, I'd love to hear a little bit more about these 10 levers. Which ones you think you're personally the most optimistic about, and which ones you maybe think, it's going to take a bit of arm twisting, or maybe, dare I say it, a change in the political landscape in DC.
No, thanks. And yeah, you also give me an easy question. I think the ones that I'm most positive about, and I won't say hopeful, but just really positive about at the very start is on country ownership, right, and country investment plans. I think, again, not just because of the current political environment, but because it's time. And for a very, very long time, countries have wanted to make it clear that they are in the driver's seat. They have their own plans. Like Sony, I've worked in a number of countries like Vera and others. I can't tell you the number that have said, you know, thanks for the analysis, but this is actually what we want to do. The question is, are we actually listening as institutions? And so I think that's the starting point. The plans are there. And even if they're not there on a website or they're not being touted, they have been developed. So I think that's a key bit. The second one for me is private capital. There is a lot of money in a lot of places looking for homes. And a lot of that money is aiming at what is broadly resilient. It's not all, you know, bad money, right? A lot of it is very happy to go into the renewable space, but also into agriculture and also into sectors, infrastructure sectors that are needed. So I think I'm extremely optimistic on that. The question is, will we be able to bring the appropriate de-risking mechanisms? I think we need innovation, but I don't think it's innovation for innovation's sake. Can we take the things that work? We know how to do public-private partnerships. Why aren't we doing more and more of those? And how do we make sure that we get them to the right scale? I'm not going to dodge a question on what I'm least optimistic about, but what I'm most concerned about is what I actually indicated earlier is actually perhaps most necessary, and that's around solidarity and levies. I think it is going to be very challenging in this environment to get alignment, but I don't believe that we should give up, because that's essentially saying that the piece that holds us together and contributions in sectors or from sectors that are most polluting, reallocation of subsidies, because it's too difficult, we're not going to push. And that's a direction I don't think we should be going in.
How difficult do you think it'll be, though? Like you say, there is, I feel, positive sentiment towards these things, but obviously there are a million and one blockages.
Look, I think it depends, and again, we have to be quite granular. The G7 themselves are the ones in 2009 that said we should reallocate inefficient subsidies. We didn't come up with that.
Yeah.
You came up with it, so go ahead, like, do it. So I would say that if institutions, if entities, bodies did what they said they were going to do, that would already get us quite a ways up the curve. So I don't think it was about new commitments. It's about the internal political will and the dynamic to do what you yourselves have committed to. I think Vera just talks about CBAM. If that's done, okay, fine. Let's look at the positive side of it. So I would say this is not going to be an easy few years, but it was never going to be easy regardless. So how do you make the most of the momentum that you already have? Yeah.
Sometimes I wish for easier problems. Easier.
There wouldn't be problems.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Navid, I mean, what are you expecting from out of this? I mean, the fourth conference on financing development is happening. What do you hope to get out of that?
Well, it's not what I hope, I expect, what people need. See, you gather leaders from all over the world, you raise hope, expectations, and if you do not deliver some actions which are desperately needed in the area of debt, in investment, international development cooperation, then the distrust will exacerbate. So these actions are needed. So we should begin with what is needed and what is possible and see the gap there, so that we do not disappoint people by showing we couldn't do anything that you needed. We will be able to deliver so much in terms of political agreement. So what I have done, I don't have it with me right now. I have a cheat sheet on, look at the positives we have done so far. Look at the action by multilateral development banks, inconceivable in 2020. They were not willing to optimize their balance sheets. In 2022, we have a breakthrough. They have a roadmap, $350 billion in 10 years. Look at collaboration on AI. Despite the differences at the UN, they are working together to develop global norms. Look at collaboration on high seas, on oceans. So we cannot underestimate the force of multilateralism. It pushes you to act because of the compelling nature of problems which are beyond the remit of one country. So I remain fairly confident that the trend I have seen in terms of challenges hit us, we act. So that will continue. Ambition depends on few actors positioning, but we have no choice to force multilateralism ahead and make sure the 2030 agenda regains its speed. What alternatives do you have? If you want to live on this planet and make sure the progress we have achieved in the last 3 decades, 26% poverty in the 90s, we are down to 8.6%. So why are you giving up on your accomplishments? So I remain confident that we will continue to work together. Ambition may differ, but multilateralism is the best antidote you have at this juncture to fight the forces of fragmentation.
So what are the key UN proposals if we're going to reorganize this international financial architecture to enable these things?
See, first of all, what is financial architecture? I must tell you, there is nothing called a system which was created in one go. It's an amalgamation of many things. So we look at institutions, we look at markets, we look at groupings that exist, G20, G7, B20. And then we see the behavior of individuals in this system. So the UN Secretary General 3 years ago presented a comprehensive policy brief with 8 action areas. That's very ambitious. So what member states expect, or they would like to see, they want to see a shift in governance, where voice and representation of developing countries, and you heard President Nishad said this morning, they should be around the table where decisions are made that impact them. So architectural change but governance is the facade. What else? Policy orientation, operations, they need to change. Markets, regulations, behavior, international tax system. They are very specific. Debt architecture, outdated. So these are specific proposals with very meaningful actions, which are in the zero draft and in the Secretary General's proposals. I see some of them will move. Look, on taxation, despite recent setbacks, we had a breakthrough, and Norway's leadership was critical in pushing that forward. That at the United Nations, you have comprehensive conversation on international tax regimes. So things are moving in the right direction, but on architecture, debt, we need immediate solution and some breakthrough. Investment, public sector has to move into leverage, private finance, and international development cooperation, because the competing demands of humanitarian, development, and global public goods have to be balanced.
Yeah. Well, Sony, do you feel that we're on the right track?
I've just come back after a month of self-care break to prepare myself to cope with Trump 2.0. So perhaps not the best question to be asking me, but I think just following up on what you said, what choice do we have apart from thinking, hoping we're on the right track and to make it happen? And the important thing I think to remember is all of us have agency, right? I mean, looking at the headlines, the stark actions, the sort of Trump on steroid phenomenon of the past 2 weeks, it is very easy to get completely hopeless. And the very critical thing to remember is everybody, every single one of us, at country level, institutional level, at an individual level, domestically, internationally, has agency and scope within our day job and outside to do the right thing. And I think that a lot of there's between heat and noise, there's going to be a lot of noise, and we will almost surely end up with much less heat, because every single one of the actions taken, no matter how radical, ridiculous, in fact, the more radical and the more ridiculous, will be resisted in some form or the other, right? I mean, again, I think there's a little bit of shock and awe going on, because it all started on this note. Everybody's sort of very pliant and sort of lying down. But, I mean, if your existence depends on, standing up, this is what is going to happen. And at the broader, sort of economic level of my day job, I've just finished advising my 6th G20. And I think there the situation from a sort of fundamental macroeconomic perspective is an absolute slam dunk. And let me explain. So if you look at the whole history of sort of all human progress, every bit of sort of prosperity we take for granted. There are only two fundamental sources of all economic growth and prosperity, and those are human capital, broadly defined, human ingenuity, right, and natural capital. And everything else, whether it's financial capital or intellectual capital, intellectual property, etc., is nothing but accumulated surpluses of human beings using their creativity to exploit natural capital in ever more productive and efficient ways over the decades, right? So the pessimistic way of looking at the current situation is there has never been a bigger pool of wasted underemployed human capital as exists today. Well, for every headline in rich economies about labor market shortages, demographic decline, there's 25 million Indians and sub-Saharan Africans coming into the workforce every single year. Statistically, several million of them are smarter than any of us in the room, and we know all of them are willing to work twice as hard. Giving this human capital the potential to be the best version of themselves, we could be at the golden age of economic growth and productivity, right? And natural capital, again, similarly depressing scenario. The stock of natural capital, whether it's carbon, biodiversity, etc., has never been as depleted as it is today. But we are so far from what it would be a macroeconomically, financially efficient corner that even marginal improvements, even if we slowed down the pace at which we were destroying natural capital, the potential to boost global growth is enormous. There has never been a bigger pool of money invested in unproductive assets as exists today through our pension funds, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, insurance firms, etc. Most of it is inflating house prices and otherwise unproductive assets, right? Which even a small proportion of it were redeployed towards providing opportunities, productive employment opportunities, which can be facilitated much better because of the normalization of remote work, because artificial intelligence reduces the barriers to entry for a huge, huge proportion, and the productivity miracle waiting to happen, which as a side effect, even if you don't use the word SDGs, will deliver on the SDGs, will deliver growth, prosperity, income, healthcare, education, aspiration, democracy, right? So imagine if we were in this situation, from a climate perspective, from a developmental perspective, but at a different time, we would be much, much worse. We are luckily in a place where technological solutions to most of the biggest challenges we face exist, and many of them are commercially viable. There has never been so much financial capital as exists today, which has both got a diversification motive and a seeking future higher returns motive to redeploy to countries with more favorable demographics and catch-up growth potential. There has never been a time where, at a global level, there has been so much potential human creativity and ingenuity waiting to be unleashed, right? So we are, structurally speaking, in the best, luckiest place we could hope to be, where over the foreseeable horizon, the solutions to our pension challenges, to our developmental challenges, and the environmental challenges all lie roughly in the same direction. Let's not waste this opportunity.
Well, that's a hopeful message, at least.
It's for my sanity.
No. So I want to put on the record that this is the best-looking, smartest crowd of people I've ever seen. Vera, what about you? I mean, what do you think we could do to encourage and nurture sort of a more greener industrialization that would go hand in hand and developing in many countries as well?
I think three things, and some of it is already happening. I go on record as saying that, following up on what you said, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act of the United States, $350 billion in subsidies. We all talk about subsidies when we talk about the developing world. $350 billion of first loss is the IRA. $350 billion of subsidies, $350 billion of venture capital was put into the United States under the Biden administration. Before that, we did not believe that battery energy storage was a reality, was a possibility, that you could actually use battery energy storage to run and power manufacturing. Within 3 years, the cost of battery energy storage has gone from $1 billion to 350. It is now popping up in every small corner of the United States of battery energy storage. As a matter of fact, I have investors from South Africa that are investing in battery energy storage in America to understand the technology so that they can eventually move it back to the United States, to South Africa, because there is a subsidy and a first loss guarantee in America. And so we need, when we talk about first loss, to move away from the idea that it's just something that is being given to those developing countries. It is actually the underpinnings of innovation, of development, if we need for it to go quickly. And I think for me, this is where I get a lot of hope, is that when we see within the 3.5 years, the huge innovation that happened in the United States, because we were able to subsidize, and yes, the subsidy was painful for many of us developing countries, because investments moved from, if you were planning to invest in Ghana and all of a sudden there's 350 billion in the United States, you went back to the United States. If you were planning to invest in Germany and all of a sudden Intel, realizes there is a subsidy in America, Intel moves to America. And so Europe decided then to give a subsidy to European factories. And so again, a new boost of innovation, of productivity. But what we now need is that the Common Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is the new sort of carbon mechanism for the world, is able to take the innovation from those subsidies and make them a global public good, so that Egyptian steel can get green, and that Egyptian steel and Cameroonian steel and Ghanaian shipping, because with the CBAM, everything that comes from Ghana into Europe is going to become more expensive because they're not using the right fuel. But we now have better fuel technology. We need to share that technology. If we share the technology, it's going to happen much faster, and the developing world is going to come together. And then we don't need trillions. We need maybe hundreds or millions, because we've shared the technology. So for me, I really believe, and I think the story around green does not have to be a story that says be green because it's good. Be green because it's profitable. You all saw 2 days ago, 3 days ago, in headlines of the FT and others, we lost $700 billion in speculative money because DeepSeek said, hey, I can run all of your Bitcoin factories with much cheaper energy. I know how to do it much cheaper. And essentially, what we are beginning to see is that new technology is making many things that we thought were going to be expensive. So the 500 billion AI announcement that was made, all of a sudden we don't need 500 billion. DeepSeek is telling us we need 52 million. Listen to this. This is what is happening. This is why markets are moving in this last week, is where technology is getting so much better. So 2030 may seem so close and so difficult to get to, but I think with the technology that is out there, electric cars, 500,000 of them are being sold in Europe, in the United States, in China. We can get to 1 million. Ethiopia now has electric cars. Benin is moving to electric cars. They're manufacturing it there. So I think what we need to do is see how fast, and that's why the 80% emissions in the G20 is so important. If the G20 alone, forget about even giving more and additional resources to the developing nations, do it yourselves. If you get there, it will make it cheaper for everybody else to get there even faster with a lot more, and we will meet the 2030 target. So this is where I get hope, is that we get those lights of the IRAs that come up. India is doing something, the EU is doing something, Saudi Arabia is doing amazing stuff, Norway as well. If we could federate all of those new innovations, we will be there, and I'm hopeful.
Thank you. Hey. You're from I say Norway's a small country, but Barbados is even smaller, though you have far better cuisine. I remember a flying fish sandwich I had in Bridgetown that was spectacular. What's your perspective? Like I said, all these big projects and the big spending plans in Saudi Arabia, China, India, the US, smaller countries have a slightly different perspective. Do you think we can benefit from that the spillovers will not just suck attention elsewhere?
I think that both what Sony and Vera have said is incredibly accurate and very inspirational, and I think that's the starting point, is to know what's possible. I think from a growth perspective, and again, it depends on the smaller economy. It depends on how diversified your economy is. Barbados, 45 to 55% of the GDP is directly or indirectly linked to the tourism sector. So, how you diversify, there are ways, but it's going to take time. Prime Minister Motley will more often than not speak of large ocean states, not small island states. And I think there's an awful lot that we don't know about in waters that are barely explored, right? So we know way more than about land than we do about water. Where I'm concerned is more in the space that I think crosses into SDGs and resilience and investments in things that don't quite yet have that return, for which the business models are not clear, and for which the balance between public and private will still skew towards the public, right? So of course you can benefit, but I just think it's going to require a little bit more creativity. And my worry is that in the time it takes us to become creative, these economies are incredibly fragile, incredibly fragmented. Cost of everything is expensive, of labor, of logistics, of just getting anything from A to B, and we don't have the scale. So, yes, we will benefit from the IRA for sure, but how do you bring the right developers at the right time when your markets are 70, 80, 200,000 people? So I think there's another dimension that we have to look at. It's not just for small islands. This is for small landlocked countries in Africa. This is for countries in the Pacific. But I think that is an additional dimension that has to follow. Just one last point, because I realize we're over time, that Sunny mentioned, which is of deep concern to me, and that's the nature side. All of this technology has an impact on the planet, and it has an impact on the communities that are in those extractive natural capital spaces. And how long before we develop a system, a trading system, governance, rules, regulations, which really allow the development trajectory of these countries, of our countries, to benefit? And that includes in the tourism sector. It's not just about extracting cobalt. Absolutely. This is the extractive nature of an industry, any industry that needs to grow. That could be cruise ships, right? That could also be deep sea minerals. How do we switch our minds away from growth, climate, like again, silos? There's an interconnected system, and nature is at the center of it. And if we maximize on one, emissions, but don't optimize the full equation, we're going to be paying for it eventually.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great note to end on. I also managed to get through without coughing, but thank you very much. Sorry, Navid, I have probably like 50 more questions. I think I sent over some of them.
We're looking at
but we are now over time. But thank you very much for your patience, and yes, please, you have to go through the panel.